In the mid-'80s, I joined the Berkeley Public Schools Fund, which at that time was the Berkeley Public Education Foundation, raising really millions of dollars over the last 25 years for public schools. In '96, I joined the Planning Commission. I chaired that commission for 2 years. And in 2000, I joined the Zoning Adjustments Board, which grants land use entitlements in Berkeley, and I chaired that board for 2 years. In 2004, I was elected to the City Council, and I've served there for 12 years, representing kind of north central Berkeley, Solano Avenue, north of 8,000 Oaks. I think my reputation in the community is such that I'm seen as a collaborator and somebody who wants to build consensus. I am not an ideologue, and I freely admit that. I think in a community as diverse as Berkeley's, and we're becoming less diverse, but in a community in terms of perspectives that are very diverse, I think building consensus is important. For too long, the council has had camps, so to speak, that seem to be wedded to moving in a particular direction without really sitting down with other folks in the community and seeing what works for everyone. And I believe that is a position that I have in the community and one that people honor. In terms of priorities, there are a lot of challenges in Berkeley, as there are throughout actually the state and the nation. Housing affordability, and connected with that, the homeless population in our community is a serious problem that we need to deal with. If we're going to have people who work in Berkeley have even the slightest opportunity to live in Berkeley, we need to take some of our resources and move them in that direction. I'm also, having been a school teacher and having worked with the foundation for 25 years, I am totally committed to universal pre-K for our kids. One of the reasons why I joined the first in the nation soda tax campaign, Measure D, 2 years ago, was to try and secure funds for that kind of a program. I'm proud to say that Measure D is in fact there was an article in the New York Times this morning about Measure D, and actually an endorsement in the New York Times of the Oakland measure and the San Francisco measure and the Albany measure, which is fairly unusual. We by law have to balance our budget every June. So I can too say that for 12 years I've passed a balanced budget in Berkeley. But that's because the California Constitution requires that I do so. Again, in terms of housing, affordable housing, I think we need to not focus all of our resources on the very poorest, but also focus some resources, and I think I have the ability to do it in very creative ways to provide housing for the missing middle, meaning teachers, social workers, librarians, etc. I'm working currently with 2 school board members looking at surplus properties that they have and surplus properties that the city has to see if we can move forward. I would also like to involve public employee unions and teachers union in helping to fund some of those programs. We have a great model in Berkeley, Presentation High School, which is now called University Terrace. It's 75 units that the university created for faculty, and you can buy a 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath condo in that project for about $350,000 today, which obviously is very attractive. I've been endorsed by Robert Reich, by Nancy Skinner, who's candidate for the Senate, by Senator Lonnie Hancock, by a majority of my council members. I've also been endorsed by all of the school board members who are endorsing. One member is not endorsing anyone. And East Bay League of Conservation Voters, East Bay. It's a mouthful. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Who's up next? We don't know now.
Sorry, we'll go with Kriss. And then
Okay.
We're not going to rock, paper, scissors. So, my name is Kriss Worthington, and I've balanced as many budgets as both Councilmember Arreguin and Capitelli put together, 20 budgets, but I don't think that actually means anything, particularly in this situation. More importantly, I actually understand what's in the budget. Councilmember Capitelli has been attacking me for, taking $4 million out of the reserve fund a few weeks ago, and now he's saying $5 million, and I've never proposed that at all. So I actually understand what's in the budget that I voted for and also what I proposed. I sponsored over 2,000 city council items, and most all of them have won. A few years ago, graduate students did a study, and 98% of my items had won at that time. Nobody's done a study in the last couple of years, so I don't know if the percent is 96 or still 98, but almost all my items win because I am a passionate progressive activist, but I'm also a common sense person, and I want to win. So I'm happy to take half a loaf or a quarter of a loaf, if that's what we can get, to move in the right direction. Many of my items are leading the way for transparency in city government, making information available to the public, introducing innovative technologies to use, simple things like, paying for your parking meter with your phone. Just simple little things that Berkeley is way behind. UC Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco. Using technology, we are woefully behind in a city which is, got the geniuses that create more great scientific and technological inventions probably than any city I can think of. So I've also appointed the largest number of Asian and Pacific Islanders, the largest number of Latinos, the largest number of African Americans. I think it's scandalous that we have a candidate running for mayor who, for much of the time in office, has had 0 African Americans and 0 Latinos, and then after a big outcry from the public, now they seem to have maybe 1 Asian or 1 Latino or 1 or 2 African Americans. Out of 39 appointees, in a city where about 40% of the population is minority, to just have 1 or 0 or 1 of any ethnic group, to me, is so just unthinkable. It's not even a political issue, it's a moral issue. George Bush and Ronald Reagan had a better record of appointing people of color than some of our council members. I think that's totally morally unacceptable. I am passionately progressive, but that doesn't mean that when we're working on policies, I only focus on cutting edge progressive policies. I've also introduced the largest number of items about public safety, economic development, and fiscal responsibility. The irony of Mr. Capitelli attacking me so much about reserves is in 2003, I successfully created a rainy day fund to increase the reserves. In 2008, 2010, 2011, and 2012, I proposed it, and I got the city manager to propose it 1 year, and the city council, including him, voted it down. So he attacks me for raiding the reserves, but he's refused to increase it. 2003, he wasn't there, so he can't be blamed. But 2008, 2010, 2012, 11, 2012, and even this year, I proposed it again, and at 3 council meetings, they wouldn't vote for it, including him. I proposed reforming our police review commission, similar to what Oakland's proposing. The city council had it on the agenda 4 times and refused to vote on it. The 5th meeting it was on the agenda, they voted to table it permanently. So Oakland and San Francisco, Richmond, San Jose, they're all making progress on police reform. Berkeley City Council had the opportunity. We had the mild version from Police Review Commission, and we had the progressive version like Oakland. And the City Council declined to do even one component of any of those 2 options. So, I've been there for 20 years. I've gotten an amazing amount accomplished, and I think I know how to get even more accomplished if I get to be elected mayor. And my last sentence is, I'm encouraging people to vote for both me and Councilmember Arreguin because we have ranked choice voting and we should use it.
Wow. So my name is Ben Gould. I was born and raised in Berkeley. I went to Berkeley High, graduated from Berkeley schools. I'm currently a graduate student at Cal in public policy and environmental engineering. I decided to run for mayor because I feel like we have to do more to address housing affordability, reinvest in our parks and infrastructure, and expand our leadership in environmental sustainability. For housing affordability, we face a critical housing shortage here in the Bay Area that's driving up prices for everybody across the board. We need more housing both so that newcomers who want to live in Berkeley and the rest of the Bay Area can find a place to do so without displacing others, while also building more affordable, subsidized low-income housing to ensure we preserve Berkeley's socioeconomic diversity. For parks and infrastructure, Berkeley has $500 million in deferred maintenance and capital improvements. I want to work with City Council, with the community, to develop a long-range plan so that over the next 30 years we can figure out how to rebuild and reinvest in our infrastructure and really restore Berkeley as a world-class city. And for environmental sustainability, our climate action plan is a goal of 80% reduction in CO2 emissions by the year 2050. It's going to be 10 years old now, so I think it's time to look at it again and realize that it fails to address natural gas, which accounts for more than a third of our emissions in Berkeley. So we cannot physically meet our emissions goal without addressing natural gas. So I'm proposing that City Council look into requiring new construction, not install natural gas fired heating, water heating, cooking, or dryer systems. So we can stop increasing our use of natural gas and instead start to work on reducing it. I also want us to see more to expand transit and biking in Berkeley. Berkeley is one of the more people in Berkeley are interested but afraid to bike than any other major bike-friendly city. And I think if we really expand Berkeley's bike infrastructure with better bike lanes, more protected buffers, we can do a lot to increase non-automotive uses of transportation. My background is in policy analysis and engineering. I'm currently the chair of the Community Environmental Advisory Commission. I previously served in the Graduate Assembly, UC Berkeley's graduate student government, where I also served in the budget committee there, overseeing about $500,000 of student fees. I'm currently on the Green Initiative Fund, awarding grants to innovative student projects to improve sustainability on campus. I worked at Lawrence Berkeley Lab doing air quality engineering work, and the International Council for Clean Transportation doing policy consulting work for international developing countries on improving air quality emissions from transportation. My priority and focus with this background is on understanding the issues, defining the problem, and developing solutions to that defined problem, not on grandstanding or taking ideological stances based on whatever I think is most important for us to do. Additionally, with this background, I bring sort of a modern, fresh perspective to Berkeley City Council. One of the things I did last year in my spare time actually was create an interactive budget visualization for the city of Berkeley. You can see my campaign website, bengould.org/budget. It's a diagram that shows all the different sources of revenue coming into the city and all the different sources of expenditures. You can sort of see and play around with it interactively, how they all relate and sort of see different proportions of the actual values, and do it year by year as well, from 2013 through 2017 proposed budgets. So that's some of the sort of fresh perspective that I bring to City Council, and sort of innovative approach to governance and community outreach. And I really believe in a Berkeley that values diversity of thought, innovative leadership, equal access to opportunity, and environmental and social justice. I think our ability to realize some of these values and embody them is being challenged by our housing affordability crisis, our building debt in parks and infrastructure, and our changing climate around us as well through the environment. And so I'm the only candidate for I'm the only outsider candidate for City Council who has any endorsements from current council members, which really shows my ability to work with council members even as an outsider. The role of mayor is to chair council meetings and manage City Council, not manage the city administration itself. And so the fact that I, as an outsider, come in here and had second place endorsements, or for second place with still endorsements from current council members, I think really shows my ability to work with City Council. And so I'm excited to bring my engineering and policy analysis background and perspective and sort of young person and new ideas to City Council and help bring in new leadership in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thanks. So the first question for all of you to answer, we hear a lot. The main thing we hear from people in Berkeley is housing. It's unaffordable. There's not enough of it. We can't find a place to rent. It's expensive. We're not building enough new housing. We need more money for affordable housing. So how will you raise more money in the city for affordable housing? How will you spur the construction of more market rate housing? And related to the second question, do you think too much market rate housing gets blocked in Berkeley because of NIMBY-ish politics? Do you think the ZAB or the city council is often getting in the way of too much housing, or do you think there's a good democracy balance that is allowing people to appeal and shape those projects and reject the ones that Berkeley doesn't want? And we'll start with you, Mr. Capitelli, and we can just go down the line and try to keep your answer, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I know it's a big question, but
Well, that was a lot of questions, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was like 3 or 4 questions.
Yeah, no, it's 3 solid questions.
I think we have some revenue streams that are on board or will be coming on board after this election. Measure U1, which is an increase in the business license fee for landlords, is on the ballot. That's one that I have been on the steering committee for and also helped write with Steve Barton. We also have a new hotel going into the downtown, and I believe a portion of that, of the transient occupancy tax, should be dedicated to housing, affordable housing. In other words, money going into the housing trust fund. And then finally, we just, a couple of months ago, increased the in lieu fee for new development to $34,000. And as a typical example, and one I think which distinguishes me from other candidates, and that's the Harold Way project. That project will contribute $10.5 million into the housing trust fund, should it get built. Right now it's tied up in a CEQA lawsuit in court. So assuming it gets built, that $10.5 million would probably build 90 deeply affordable units in our community. That project is 300 units, 305 units. So we're looking at almost a third of that total market rate units would be built. In terms of NIMBY and the difficulty in obtaining entitlements in Berkeley, I think probably the classic example is the Trader Joe's building on MLK University. It took almost 7 years for that project to get entitlements and get built. I think, interestingly, the neighborhood, which was opposed to it prior to it being built, has embraced it. Better than 50% of their customers either come by bicycle or on foot, which is something we want to see in the downtown. That project was opposed by a minority, fortunately, of the council. I think if you look at the downtown area plan, which was a plan that some council members participated in writing, and basically there was a consensus that was brought to the council. The council put an advisory item on the ballot, which approved 5 taller buildings in the downtown, 2 of which now have been entitled, one Harold Way in court, and then the new hotel, which they have said they're going to start construction in this fall. In any case, there was an attempt, I believe, very consistently over the last 4 years, including Measure R in 2014, to undermine the downtown plan. The downtown plan in 2012, the advisory measure was approved by 2/3 of the electorate. Measure R in 2014 was rejected, which would have, I think, created so many poison pills that would have stopped development in the downtown, and I think many people agree with me, including 74% of the voters in Berkeley. So I think there's a very distinct bright line between me and other members of the council who are running for mayor in terms of the downtown. 30 seconds more, okay? Yeah, I'm glad you're timing me. Jerry Brown had proposed a by right proposal to the legislature in August and September, which was rejected. I think it needed some refinement. I don't think it protected communities quite enough in terms of decision making, but I would like to see something like that move forward, and actually legislatively have done that with affordable housing, and that is if projects meet certain zoning standards, that basically they're subject to design review and they move forward. It's tremendously expensive particularly for a nonprofit, to fund a project that you don't know will ever be built. And so I support lowering the level of discretion, still having design review, still having the project conform to the zoning rules.
Ben, where are you at this monster question? Monster question.
Well, I'd like to say I'm the most pro-housing candidate of all the candidates for mayor. Let's see, how am I going to tackle these set of questions? So I think there's a number of ways to look at how you frame the problem. This is what I'm saying I do. I think the issue is that the cost of housing, when you go to find housing, whether it's rental or buying it, is too expensive. Housing costs too much on the open market. Some people might argue that the issue is actually too many local families are getting displaced. I mean, if you're a property owner and your home costs a lot more now than it did when you bought it, that's a return on investment for you. That's not a problem for you, you know. Some people might argue about the low-income housing being the top priority, and I agree that that's a really important issue, but I don't think that conflicts with building more market rate housing. The issue we have right now is that lots of people want to live here in Berkeley, in the Bay Area, more people than housing, and so people who pay the most money get the housing that's available, and anybody who can't pay as much money gets either displaced or unable to find housing. And so building new housing, even at the top end, helps those people at the lower end find housing because it means people who can pay more money have more places to go now. Berkeley actually invented single-family zoning 100 years ago for the purposes of protecting property values and segregating by income. The developer of the Claremont neighborhood saw apartments going up in Elmwood, lower property values, and he was like, I don't want that to happen in my neighborhood. Let's create zoning so you can't build apartments in my neighborhood and keep the property values high for my land that I own. He then partnered with industry in West Berkeley to drive out low-income families from industrial areas so they could have free reign over pollution there. And we're sort of in the mess we are now with the rest of the country as well. So I think one of the ways we can spur construction of more market rate housing is to look at some of Berkeley's outdated historic racial and divisive zoning laws and figure out if we can find a way to make a more inclusive city. Councilmember Capitelli talked about building more housing. He's been on city council for the last 12 years, but his district is almost exclusively single-family housing still. And he'll tell you his neighborhood doesn't want it, and that's fair. But the role of the mayor shows everybody in Berkeley, not just North Berkeley. And so I think we need to look at upzoning more parts of Berkeley, making it easier to build housing. Looking at issues like height limits, setbacks, other requirements. And I think a lot of this can really spur money for affordable housing. Most of Berkeley's affordable housing trust fund money comes from new construction, like the Arreguin project brings $10 million in the affordable housing trust fund, and that's where we get a lot of our affordable and low-income housing units. Again, U1 is great, it'll provide some additional revenue, a few $1 million a year for affordable housing. And then I also would be interested in looking at a parcel tax. If Berkeley voters really care about affordable housing, why not have Berkeley voters pay for it instead of just landlords who are effectively going to raise rents on new tenants then at that point. Does too much market rate housing get blocked by NIMBYs in Berkeley? I like to shy away from the term NIMBYs because I think people have different reasons for blocking housing. NIMBYs often are assumed to be protecting property values when they protect things that reflect in property values. But I do think that Berkeley is a very active community who are generally not supportive of new housing, but I think there's a very inactive community that would support new housing if we can find ways to get them activated and informed and show at council meetings or ZAB meetings to speak on that issue. I know some local groups have started doing that with SFA Area Renters Federation and the East Bay Forward organization. I've actually been endorsed by Sonia Strauss, the founder of SFBARF, and among other housing advocates, both with Livable Berkeley and with East Bay Forward. So I'm excited to be the most promising candidate for mayor.
My district includes Telegraph Avenue. I spearheaded efforts to increase the floor area ratio and the height limits in my district, from Dwight to Bancroft, Bancroft, Durant, the whole campus area. And it took me, the planning commission rejected it several times. I had to get the city council to overrule the planning commission twice. Eventually, we now have thousands of extra units will be allowed to be built near the campus because I went to bat and fought with the planning commission, fought with the staff, and fought with the city council to actually get it moved forward. When it actually came to vote at the city council, they all voted for it, but it was me who led the way to build thousands of extra housing units in my district. In terms of money, certain members of the city council, including one candidate for mayor, voted to reduce the fee for affordable housing by $8,000 per unit. If that was being done as an incentive to get people to come to Berkeley because no building was being made, I would be for it. But at a time when lots of people are coming and building lots of things, to reduce the fee at that time, it's not an incentive, it's just a corporate giveaway. Similarly, the same politicians reduced the significant community benefits fee for one company. The other companies have to go through a pro forma and evaluate how much they have to pay. One corporation was given a fee reduction in their significant community benefits, having to pay millions of dollars less, and all 5 of the tall buildings were exempted from paying the arts fee, which is millions of dollars for the arts. If the council majority had voted for Jesse Arreguin's proposal 4 years ago, we would have had probably $12 million extra for affordable housing. but the progressives supported him and the moderates didn't. Similarly, the city council had actually implemented the short-term rental fee, which the ordinance has to do with stopping landlords from taking entire buildings of rental housing off the rental market. So we need the ordinance to stop the loss of like entire buildings of affordable units, but we need the fee for those people who are renting it out, paying a fee that will give us some money. The city council has sat on that and delayed it. The short-term action plan, so far I've introduced 49 proposals in the last year approximately of solutions for affordable housing. 27 of them were introduced I wrote them in September of last year. It took from September until May, a 7-month delay for the city council to vote. And was it because they were so radical that they're going to vote against them? No, 23 out of those 27 were referred to the city manager to be considered in the plan. But it took 7 months to start the process of studying, and once you study, it's going to take another 7 months or longer to actually study them. So the city council delayed these ideas by 7 months, as they've delayed many, many other important environmental, disabled, women's issues. So many important issues get delayed by months and years by the city council. The issue about market rate. Oh, and Mr. Capitelli says somehow he's the only one to get the $10 million for affordable housing from Howard Way. My motion to approve the Howard Way project included that money for affordable housing plus additional significant community benefits in addition to that. And it under the pro formas that I've seen of comparable large buildings, my proposal was not that demanding. It was more ambitious than what was adopted, but it wasn't ludicrously ambitious. In terms of market rate housing, the public process at the zoning board and the city council is a tiny delay in building projects. The big delay is you go in and you turn in your application and they say do A, B, C, and D. You do it, you come back and they say, oh, and you also have to do E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. And it's like, how come you only told me 4 or 5 things, and then I come back and you told me 9 things? This happens project after project, small, medium, and large. And I like Ben Gould's enthusiasm about adjusting zoning, but I don't think he goes far enough. I think our entire zoning ordinance is insane. It is confusing, it's convoluted, it's actually contradictory. So the poor staff, the public and the developers both get mad at the planning department staff. And I'm like, those poor staff, on this page it says you can do this, and on this page it says you can't. So which page do they tell the person to follow? And even when they're training the staff, I've sat in trainings, when new people are appointed to the planning commission and they teach you, like, manufacturing is only allowed in West Berkeley. I'm like, well, that's funny. I have nationally renowned manufacturers in my district, and you're telling them they can't be there. Tall buildings, the city council is very divided between how many tall buildings. I couldn't care less. Whether or not there's 0 or whether or not there's 100, I really don't care. What I care is, are the buildings going to have affordable housing? Primarily, a lot of it, and are they going to treat the workers well? So the different factions that are arguing over 0, 5, 6, 10, whatever, I think that's all a waste of time. The real thing is the affordability and greener buildings.
So I have a number of ideas in ways we can actually increase money for affordable housing, and actually for the past 14 years I've been a leader on increasing affordable housing and resources for affordable housing. As I said, when I served on the Housing Commission, we built several hundred units of low-income housing along major transit corridors throughout Berkeley, and on the City Council, I fought very hard to increase money for affordable housing. I led the effort on the Council to adopt our housing impact fee in response to the Palmer decision, and as a result of that, we now are getting millions of dollars to our Affordable Housing Trust Fund and new affordable units. I will note that some members of the Council were opposed to moving ahead expeditiously and putting that fee in place. I'm glad we did, because we would have missed this opportunity to leverage private development to increase resources for affordable housing. So our mitigation fees are one way, and we just increased the fee to $34,000 a unit. Measure U1 on the Berkeley ballot, which I strongly support and which I actually introduced 4 years ago, will provide $3.5 million annually to increase funding for affordable housing. And Measure A1, the county housing bond, which I also support, is another important tool as well for Berkeley and other jurisdictions in Alameda County to create affordable housing. But there are other ways we can increase local funding sources. We have about $36 million in requests for affordable housing in Berkeley right now, and we have probably roughly $3 million in our affordable housing trust fund, so there's a significant gap in need. Our short-term rental policy could provide dedicated revenue. Our transient occupancy tax, our hotel tax, and looking at general fund revenues. We're seeing actually increased general fund revenues, and how can we prioritize some of that money for affordable housing? Councilor Worthington proposed that we provide a $1 million loan this last budget cycle to our affordable housing trust fund because we have such a huge need. That unfortunately was rejected by the council majority. I agree that there's a bright line in this race with regard to who will fight for affordable housing. I did not vote to reduce the affordable housing fee by $8,000 and then vote again and again and again, even when the market changed and there's a huge amount of construction happening. I did not vote to reduce the amount of significant community benefits and give a $2.4 million reduction in affordable housing fees for the Harold Way project. I did not vote to delay the implementation of the landlord tax or the short-term rental ordinance. These could have provided millions and millions of dollars in funding to create affordable housing in Berkeley, and yet one of the candidates at this table was an obstacle to that actually happening. At a time when we absolutely need more resources for affordable housing, we need to provide leadership, and I will fight for every single dollar and every single unit of affordable housing. But part of the solution is absolutely building more supply and leveraging private investment to create affordable housing. As Councilor Worthington talked about, we just increased density on Telegraph north of Dwight, which hopefully can help address some of the student housing crisis that we're dealing with in Berkeley. We have a significant shortage of housing for our students, and I want to address that as mayor. But we also need to look at other areas of Berkeley and our priority development areas to increase density. Certainly, there's more that we can do to make the process easier. We do need to modify our zoning ordinance to remove barriers to constructing housing. We have made some progress. We just made it easier to construct accessory dwelling units throughout Berkeley's residential neighborhoods. And there's certainly more that we need to do in that area, such as reducing the parking requirements, and I'm open to that. We have thousands of units that have been permitted or approved in Berkeley in the last several years. And this is despite, strong neighborhood opposition. So I think our process is working, but that doesn't mean that we can't make modifications. I just have to say, I thought the governor's by right zoning was flawed in that it would have given market rate developers significant increase in profits without ensuring labor standards, environmental protections, or preserving local control for affordable housing. It would have allowed the demolition of rent-controlled housing throughout the city of Berkeley and the state of California. There could be a way we can allow by right development, but it needs to be done in the right way that balances increasing housing construction with the need for community benefits and creating affordable housing. And lastly, I think the solution as well is using our power of the bully pulpit as mayor, working with other mayors to lobby the state legislature to A, overturn Costa-Hawkins, and B, to increase funding and resources for affordable housing, which our governor has consistently voted against.
So just quick yes or no, do you support overturn of Costa-Hawkins? You obviously said yes. Or amend also, you could say, maybe amend it too. What's your position on Costa-Hawkins?
Wipe it out.
Yeah.
I would like to see Costa-Hawkins repealed and repeal Prop 30. Or like, no.
Just
Sorry.
Costa-Hawkins.
Just Costa-Hawkins? No. Yeah.
Repealed or?
No, don't touch it.
Don't touch it.
Yeah.
I would seek amendment.
Amending it. Questions from over here?
You can't buy a home or rent an apartment unless you make money. Tell me about the process working on the minimum wage ordinances this year, or in your case, Ben, your perception of the process, and if you could go back to the beginning of that process, would you approach it differently? And Ben, since you were on the outside, I'll let you go first.
There you go first. Gosh.
Lucky you.
Let's see.
And 2 minutes,
Okay.
ish.
Alright, I can do 2 minutes on the minimum wage ordinances.
We don't have hard and fast rules here, but yeah.
Okay. So, gosh, I guess I started going to council meetings just before the minimum wage ordinances really got into a fight. Initially, I was more in favor of the council minimum wage ordinance. My concern with a more aggressive minimum wage ordinance was that it didn't consider the impacts it would have on students or seniors. Because raising the minimum wage by 20% in 1 year, we could easily see, especially prices go up for common retail goods. For a store that's predominantly labor costs, like wage labor costs, we could see prices go up whether it's 10 to 15% in 1 year, just to cover those additional labor costs, and that would be unmet by additional student financial resources or seniors on fixed incomes. So I was in support of the more progressive minimum wage increase for that reason, help phase it in more gradually so we could adjust their spending habits. I'm really good with the compromise that was reached. I did feel like progressive, the more gradual minimum wage one was not as aggressive as it could be while still balancing the different needs. So I think $15 an hour in 2018 is a great place to be. I'm really happy with that consensus that was reached.
Thank you. Jesse, go ahead.
Well, I think the process was certainly flawed, and I agree with the general comment that raising wages is critical to ensuring that working and middle-income people can afford to live in the city. If you are making below the minimum wage, you cannot afford Berkeley's rising housing costs. And so I think raising wages and addressing income inequality is a critical issue that we need to address as a community to preserve our economic and cultural diversity. And something I'm deeply committed to, and I have been for many, many years. I was one of the original co-sponsors of Mayor Bates's proposal to study a municipal minimum wage. And when the proposal came from the Labor Commission in 2014, I was part of a coalition of community and labor that supported creating a pathway to $15 an hour. And we had a compromise at that time in 2014. And Mr. Capitelli and I were the co-sponsor of that proposal. The council seemed to have consensus that we were going to move ahead with a pathway. We asked staff to draft an ordinance to adopt that minimum wage. And then at the meeting in May 2014, Mr. Capitelli said that I'm now in a position where I have to renege. And so that set back the efforts for the city council to be able to move forward with actually adopting a pathway to $15 an hour. We ended up at $12.53 an hour, which is where our minimum wage is now. The Labor Commission continued to work to try to move forward a living wage. When the issue came back to council in the fall of 2015, the council majority decided to delay consideration of adopting a strong minimum wage policy, and then came up with this 2-tiered minimum wage. The community felt honestly betrayed by the city council. It didn't feel like the council was committed to developing a minimum wage that would lift people out of poverty, and went to the extraordinary effort of circulating a petition to put a minimum wage on the ballot, which I and Councilor Worthington supported. The response to that petition by some members of the council was to put a competing minimum wage measure on the ballot, which is Measure BB. Not to work with the community to try to reach a compromise, but to put a competing measure on the ballot, which I'm sure we can all agree, we have 2 things on the ballot, it confuses voters. And it has the likely effect of killing both the chances of both things passing, which is actually a ploy that big business uses all the time. So I think that was a missed opportunity when the initiative was happening for us to compromise and reach an agreement. And so we have these 2 things on the ballot. There was a whole nother round of negotiations on multiple occasions. Mr. Capitelli backed out of those agreements. We had a special meeting of the city council where we're going to vote on a compromise. Councilor Worthington and I and Councilor Moore were the only councilors that showed up. And then we missed the deadline for removing Measure BB on the ballot, so now we have these 2 measures, and now we have to tell people to vote no on both. And so there was opportunity after opportunity after opportunity where we could have exercised leadership. And there was a lack of a commitment and leadership to reach a compromise and to create a pathway to $15 an hour. And people are struggling in our community and need a leg up. And as mayor, I will honor my word. If I make a promise, I will live up to that. And I'm committed to going beyond $15 an hour to creating a pathway to a living wage. Obviously, we need to be sensitive to the concerns of small businesses and make sure we do it in a way that considers their input and balancing raising the minimum wage with incentives to support our small businesses. Berkeley does not do enough to support its small businesses, and I'm committed to working to address that as well.
Thanks, Jesse. Laurie?
Yeah. Well, there are obviously various versions of history, and I'll try not to belabor the point too much. Number one, I think it's naive to think that Berkeley can solve income inequality in the United States. That really, at a minimum, is a regional issue, but really is a national issue in terms of income inequality. Number two, I remember saying at one of these other meetings to the panel, when the parties wanted to negotiate, they called me, and Councilmember Arreguin chimed in and said, well, actually they called me first and I told them to call you, which seems to me to be confirmation that I have the ability to work with people towards consensus, and he doesn't. We've heard a lot about, I introduced this, I introduced that, so somebody introduced such and such, and it didn't pass and it was stalled. Well, maybe it's because they were flawed proposals to begin with, and I don't want to go into the details of that. People who are paid the minimum wage, the new minimum wage in Berkeley, can't live in Berkeley. $15 an hour is like $31,000 a year. If you're going to spend 30% of that would be $9,000. That means you've got to find a place in Berkeley for $750 a month. That's not going to happen. So again, I think we're being naive to say $15 is going to allow people to live in Berkeley. That's bullshit. Finally, when the Labor Commission came to the council and said, with their proposal, the proposal was for $19 an hour, not $15 an hour. And $19 an hour would have closed down, I bet, 30% of the small businesses in Berkeley, because most of them have budgets that are substantially focused around labor costs. So, the beginning of June, I got a phone call from Andy Katz who said, would you be willing to talk to folks about a compromise? I said yes. And at that point, we spent probably, and these are their numbers, not mine, 40 to 45 hours negotiating a compromise which would get us to $15 in 2018. Towards the end of that process, we brought in small businesses, we brought in nonprofits, and we all sat at the table and we said, is this something we can live with? And everyone said yes. Now there were delays that took place in that process. There was a mention of a council meeting that was called. The reason why that council meeting would not have been productive is that the labor delayed for 5 days responding to some of the last details. And again, I don't want to go into whose fault it was or whose fault it wasn't, but nothing would have been productive at that meeting. That's why I didn't attend that meeting. I would have loved to, so that we could have pulled that measure off the ballot. In any case, a week later, we did come to a consensus agreement, and we moved forward with $15 an hour, which will be the second most aggressive schedule in the entire country. I'll leave it at that.
Kriss, do you have anything to add?
Well, Councilmember Capitelli says that the minimum wage is a good example of his leadership. And I see it, I totally agree with him that it's sort of the epitome of the picture of what he thinks is leadership. So, first of all, I was the first council member to introduce a proposal to raise the minimum wage in Berkeley in 2003 that the council adopted in 2004. So that was like 12 years ago, and it's taken us until now. Tom Bates said it was illegal for us to do this. After he got elected mayor, he was against it. And then we created a group that Nikki Gonzalez sort of championed, Raise the Wage East Bay, and he and his group convinced Tom Bates to change his mind, and then Jesse and I co-sponsored it with Tom Bates. So we certainly actively led the way on the council and moved this forward. But Mr. Capitelli was the deciding vote. 6 different times we had 4 votes. If he had voted yes, this whole thing would have been we would have had a compromise a long, long time ago. 6 different votes. He was the deciding vote to make us lose. and Max Anderson, Jesse Arreguin, and I were consistently like, let's go forward, and we consistently proposed compromises. You can read it in the minutes of the meetings. We proposed compromises and said, okay, this is not my perfect dream, but it's a compromise. Daryl Moore voted with us a bunch of times. Laurie Drost voted with us. Laurie Capitelli didn't vote with us on those compromises, and his vote would have made all 6 of those win. So it would have been, a compromise would have been reached in a publicly noticed way when the businesses and labor were in a public meeting along with the general public getting to weigh in. His way is lacking transparency. His way is have these meetings at the last minute, invite a handful of people, not let the business community know what's being negotiated in the general business community, not let the general public know what's being negotiated, and then call a special meeting, which he didn't show up to. No, maybe he's right that it wouldn't have been a productive meeting, but he could have had the courtesy of emailing the city and saying, well, I've decided that we don't need this meeting, so please cancel it. Instead, he didn't communicate to us, he communicated to a few of his buddies, but not to us. And then the second meeting, he brought the wrong language and got the city council to vote for it, which neither side was happy with. And then we had to rescind that and have a third meeting. And then after his second meeting, it was like, it's over. Sorry, it didn't work out. And then I introduced this to be on the city council at a regular public meeting where there's transparency to vote on a compromise. And then because people were like laughing, how could a council member call a meeting and not show up for it? How could they give the wrong language that neither labor nor business wanted? And people were laughing at this so-called leadership, that there was enormous pressure that something had to be done, or else Mr. Capitelli was going to look like an idiot. And so then, out of that incredible pressure, and the fact that it was going to be on the agenda, because I had already put it in a publicly transparent way on the agenda for a vote, then a new compromise came forward, which the public didn't get to see in advance, and it didn't even get to the council members until he emailed it to all of the council members against our rules. And so it's like a comedy of errors.
Okay.
Calling, this is not leadership, this is a lack of transparency, democracy, and if that's what Berkeley is going to get out of its mayor, we're all in for a rocky and very anti-progressive ride.
Do you mind if I follow up? All right, I just want to address, Laura, you talked about how there's camps. You talked about a contentious experience, or described a contentious experience with minimum wage. You talked about insane zoning and disconnect between what staff has to deal with and what council's directing. One of you in this room possibly is going to be mayor. You're going to have to lead, you're going to have to unite, you're going to have to bridge these camps. How can you do it? Why are you qualified to do it? How can you govern and sort of transcend this? Clearly there's people butting heads here and not working like a well-oiled machine necessarily. So how are you the person to lead that and move the city forward? How do you have that leadership quality? I just want to hear everybody speak to that briefly. And we'll start on we'll start with you, Ben, since you
Again?
We're not conventional here.
Man, I didn't know I was getting this seat. Okay. How will I lead, unite, bridge camps, present the sort of party politics we have in Berkeley as real Democrats? That's a great question. I think as an outsider it really helps because I don't have this long history of contentious relationships that you see going on right now. Again, like I mentioned, I'm the only outsider candidate who's been endorsed by members of City Council, which shows that I have the ability to work with them even when I'm not yet elected, which I think is really great. I think one of the biggest challenges that sort of any political issue faces is communicating the issues and the values and the preferences clearly among the different groups. I think a lot of what I saw with sort of the minimum wage discussions is a lack of clear communication. So $19 an hour was brought up. That was put forward initially by the Labor Commission as a livable wage, which was based on the city of Berkeley's number of something like $16 an hour, which is based on a political decision made in the late 90s to pay city of Berkeley employees no less than a quote-unquote living wage at $14 an hour. It was an arbitrary political decision made in the 90s that they're now carrying forward with no actual basis in cost of living, really. They said, the proposal for the livable wage would be then increasing by inflation every year, not by cost of living. So if cost of living goes down, the living wage goes up. That doesn't really make sense to me, And so I think really breaking down these barriers of like language that politicians like to throw up that say, these things that sound good but don't necessarily mean what they really would normally mean to somebody, and getting to the real issue and like thinking about what our goals are, If our goals are ensuring people making a minimum wage in Berkeley can find a place to live in Berkeley and do so comfortably, I do think that requires raising the minimum wage. I think it also requires looking at the cost of living itself, If we raise the minimum wage in Berkeley, what's to stop landlords from raising the rents as well? How can we really address the issue holistically rather than just fighting over minimum wage and numbers that may or may not make a difference in quality of life overall? Similarly, it doesn't matter if Berkeley's minimum wage goes up if nobody else's minimum wage goes up. Berkeley might lose all its businesses to neighboring cities, which wouldn't do anybody any good either. So, again, I think it's about figuring out what values we all share in common, defining the issues clearly so we can all understand them, and figuring out the best way to reach those issues in a way that meets everyone's goals. And because my experience before running for office has been on leading teams, managing organizations. I used to run a group of Engineers for a Sustainable World, where you manage engineering projects, which are very technical issues as well. It's similar, you have to understand the problem, figure out your constraints, figure out what everyone in the project is looking to get out of it, and work on that. And again, for my leadership on SEAC, I'm currently the chair of the Environmental Advisory Commission, and there we get, many of these proposals that I propose come to us, the commissions, and sometimes, more proposals is always better proposals. We take the time to sit down and really look at these proposals and think, okay, what's good here, what works, what are our goals here, and what's a good way of accomplishing that. So one example right now we're working on is a proposal from Save the Bay to put in a pilot project for cigarette butt capturing systems in downtown Berkeley. We looked at stormwater capture, we looked at cigarette butt disposal, little things, places to put your cigarette butts. They're sort of like that, but they're like stores as well. Yeah. And so we looked at that, we want to make a proposal that will be passed to city council, that will work with the city manager, and that can be maintained. So rather than just saying, city, go spend this money, put these things in, manage them yourselves, we're working with the Downtown Business Association to have them empty out the ashtrays when they're filled up. So the city doesn't have any more maintenance costs. It's just a one-time expenditure to pay for these ashtrays. So that's an example of how I'm working to sort of overcome different policy issues and bring together the different actors involved to figure out what the goal here really is and how we can best accomplish that given the resources we have.
Thank you. Kriss?
Well, I think a few years ago, the city council was pretty firm in three camps. The three left, the three moderate, and the three in the middle, and it was pretty firm. And whichever way the people in the middle went, pretty much won. And then once the three people in the middle swung towards the left, then the moderates just went along and voted with us after arguing fiercely against us, trying to stop us. Then they would vote for our motions anyway. So, those patterns have changed. I would say it's a lot less factions now. Laurie Capitelli is nowhere near to the right as Laurie Capitelli or Susan Wengraf. Daryl Moore is more to the left than Tom Bates and Linda Mayo on most things, like on the minimum wage. He voted with us many times. So I think those three factions have had cracks in them in the last 2 years. In particular, the more that Tom Bates is seen as a lame duck, we've had 8-1 votes where Tom Bates was the only no vote. So I think those factions, are not so firm as they have been. And, doing Telegraph Avenue to get the zoning upgraded so that I could have 2 more stories in my district, I worked with developers to talk to the more moderate council members. I worked with environmentalists to talk to the more liberal council members. And we eventually coalesced, a left-right coalition, and we got it approved. Despite staff resistance and some, political resistance, we got it accomplished. So I think, yes, there have been factions, but also for all these years, when 98% of my things were winning, the general public sort of says, oh, well, you're a super progressive, so you're in the minority. But how did 98% of my things win? Because I'm willing to compromise and I'm willing to negotiate. So, I constantly negotiate with Tom Bates. And people are like, well, Tom Bates is always bad-mouthing you. I'm like, yeah, but look at the council meetings. He's voting for my council items nearly all the time. So I don't think it's as firmly established as 2 camps or 3 camps. I think it's much more based on particular policy areas and to some extent the personality. Laurie Drosty is no flaming left-wing person like I am, but she's got more racial diversity in one day appointed than Capitelli in like 10 years. So, well, not one day, but maybe 1 month. You know, so I think we have a flourishing of some degree of independence, and the catastrophe would be if we get another mayor who is trying, you know, trying to delay and defeat so many progressive policies, because Capitelli's concept of consensus, his concept of consensus historically for the last 12 years has been the lowest common denominator. My idea of consensus is you come in the middle and compromise, and we get 25%, 50%. His idea of compromise is go to the lowest common denominator. I think we need, and he says we're naive to think that Berkeley can solve economic inequality. No, first of all, nobody on the city council made the motion to do the Labor Commission recommendation that he's attacking. So it's a straw man that he's attacking. And nobody
Thanks, Chris,
said,
I'm gonna have to,
can I just finish that sentence?
absolutely, finish your
So
thought.
none of us said we're going to solve economic inequality, but we did say if we take a stand like San Francisco and UC Berkeley, we can set a regional trend for $15 an hour, and we succeeded in spite of his massive resistance.
Laurie, the original question.
God, I am such a bad person, I'm feeling really badly here. I think,
You're a nice person.
Chris, my turn.
Thank you.
I think there's this desperate need sometimes in Berkeley to pigeonhole people. I remember the first time that Becky O'Malley wrote an article and mentioned me. She talked about the affable realtor. She's never referred to me as being a council member, or rarely. She refers to me as being the realtor on the council. And it's interesting that a community that prides itself on not stereotyping people tends to want to stereotype some people. We have gotten, your original question was, how the hell are any of us going to really conduct a civil process in terms of determining policy in the city of Berkeley? And I think my track record proves that I can do it. I don't want to divide the council into us's and them's. I don't want to divide the council into left-wing, moderate, and middle-of-the-roaders. It's interesting when you look at development in Berkeley and the debates we've had over the last 7, 8 years, there has been a joining of the left and the right, and the right wanting to build basically nothing, and the left looking for affordable housing. Well, if you don't want to build anything, what you'll do is you will put such onerous requirements on development that nothing will get built. And that's a novel way to approach that sort of, rather than come out and say, I don't want anything, I like Berkeley just the way it is. I like 3-story buildings in the downtown. I like single-family neighborhoods. Rather than say that, you say, if we're going to build affordable housing, and it's going to be green housing, et cetera, and you make sure there are enough conditions in there, as there were in Measure R in 2014. So how do the 3 or 4 of us get to the point where we can not live on ad hominem attacks, but actually debate policy in a transparent and civil way in the public, in front of the public? And I think that's going to take an effort on everyone's part, but I think it's going to really take an effort on the mayor's part to show some leadership there. If I'm elected mayor, I'm going to lock everybody in a room, and we're going to take a blood oath that all we're going to do is debate policy. We're not going to attack one another personally. And I'm sure some of you have watched a council meeting or come to a council meeting. We have council meetings where the public, sometimes encouraged by members of the council, where the public attacks other members of the public. We have many people in our community who won't come to a council meeting because they're uncivil. We also have people in the audience who attack council members with ad hominem attacks. We also have council members who attack the public. And we also have council members who publicly attack other council members on the dais. That needs to stop. We need to debate policy. and that's what I'll try and do if I'm mayor.
Thank you. Jesse?
So the mayor does several things. First, the mayor chairs our city council meetings, and I have experience chairing commissions in the city of Berkeley. I chaired the elected rent stabilization board for 2 years. I chaired the Housing Advisory Commission. If any of you have watched or heard of city council meetings, they are pretty ineffective. One meeting